two writers, one just starting out, the other a bestseller. Join James Blatch and Mark Dawson and their amazing guests as they discuss how you can make a living telling stories. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast with Mark and James sitting in our respective homes. I'd like to say studios, in our respective studios. And Mark's already criticised the audio quality from my brand new expensive garden office. You think it's a little echoey in here?
It does sound a little bit echoey, and actually since we've just switched record on, James's voice now is sounding several octaves lower. So we're struggling with internet and new offices at the moment, but hopefully when we put it all together, the magic of James's editing will make this sound as high quality as ever.
We'll fix it in post, as we say in the industry. Welcome along to another episode. We're feeling energized, apart from the fact that you're struggling a bit with a cold, probably the busiest period of your life. But you always look like you're smiling.
I'm not smiling inside, James. No, it's it is very busy at the moment. As we were just chatting off camera, and the Dawson family welcomed a new puppy on Saturday called Scout, and he is doing puppy things at the moment, so he's not sleeping through the night, weeing and pooing everywhere. And then there's two children, one of whom has a birthday very soon. And there's course launches. I launched a book yesterday. I've got a contract to finish a book by the end of the month. I'm quite close to that. I have signed the film deal now. So there's that.
Ah, all right. Just to check, it wasn't with Harvey Weinstein.
Do you know that is actually quite funny, James? I can't comment on that. It's more complicated, and you might be closer to.
Have you got something to tell us, Mark?
Possibly. We'll do an episode on this whole film deal once I know I can talk about it. Once it's signed, and I know that everyone is happy for me to go on the record. But it has been very complicated, and he may or may not have been involved at one point. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I had a chat with Hugh Howey yesterday, and he did a quite similar situation, quite similar sounding film deal with you, and had big names who wanted it and sort of held it up and so on. But anyway, people will hear Hugh, and we'll talk to you about your film deal in time. We've got a few things to get through today. So the main subject that we're going to talk about is the value of a reader. This is a really important subject for people to understand, because I know people often get bogged down with the immediacy of an advert or a campaign working, and they've got to take into account the holistic nature of marketing and the value in the long term. So that's going to be the main juice in this episode. But we've got a few things to get through before then. And first of all, I just want to mention that we had Jay Thorne on a few weeks back. You might remember he did this amazing train journey with Joe Penn and a couple of others, where they got on a train, I think in Chicago, and down to New Orleans, and wrote a book. And they sort of plotted it as they went along, and they finished it off in New Orleans. And that book is now out and for sale. And it was a really good story, and it was a fun thing to do. And they organised a sort of public one, if you like, one that you could apply to be a part of. And that has sold out. It's actually happening next month. Authors on a Train Retreat, it's called. So what Jay and the crew have done is they have set a date for next year. They're going to do one next year, and they've got that's just opening, and he wanted us to know first because we featured him on the podcast. So those dates, if I got them here, I think it'll be June the 3rd to the 8th, 2018, to be New Orleans via Chicago again. So if you're interested, and you would like to know more about that, you can go to authorsonatrain.com, and I think some early bird pricing until the beginning of December, so if you want to get in there quickly. Good. So that was a fun thing, and I have to say, if our lives weren't quite as busy as they are, that would be a really fun thing to get involved in. But it'd be great if a listener does get involved in it. Do let us know. Drop us a podcast. Drop us an email at this podcast, and we'll feature a mention of you. Talking of featuring mentions, Mark, we're going to talk about Patreon, because our Patreon audience is growing. That's basically becoming a VIP listener of the podcast and supporting the work of the podcast. As you can see, lots of equipment, lots of time, and we really rely on your support, and it's absolutely fantastic that you've done that. We're coming up to one of the big giveaways, which is going to be a free course. So Ads for Authors will launch at some point in November, a date to be revealed as yet. And during that launch, we will draw, right at the beginning of it, we'll draw one of our gold subscribers to get a free enrollment in that course. And then we'll do that again for 101 next year. And Mark, you've got an even more exciting idea for our Patreon audience.
Yeah, so at the moment I do a monthly Q&A, and that means that Patreon subscribers get the chance to ask me a question, and I record every month answers to those questions, and those go out to the Patreon subscribers. And other people do that in the space. Joe Penn in particular does that, and I thought it'd be nice to do something a little bit different. So what I've been thinking of, and this kind of depends on a few things coming into place, but I've got an idea of something that I'm kind of tentatively calling the Book Lab. And what that would entail would be if Patreon subscribers would have the opportunity to apply, and one a month of those subscribers would have their entire book platform critiqued. So that might be cover, blurb, author page, mailing list, platform social presence, ads perhaps. And instead of just having my voice drone on for half an hour to assess those things and break them down and see how they could be improved, I thought it would be interesting to get people with specific expertise to look at them individually. So we could have, for example, and I haven't asked these people yet, so I'm going to be asking them, but Stuart Baish, who is my designer and has designed the covers for quite a few SPF students. Stuart could look at the covers, and Stu's got tons and tons of experience in book design. We could get Brian Cohen to look at copy and suggest blurb amendments and things like that. Obviously, I can look at things in a kind of more holistic level, look at author pages and even look at ads and suggest tweaks that might improve ad performance. And then we'd put all that together and we'd edit it, and then we'd probably, I think we'd broadcast that out to the community as a whole, perhaps as a part of this podcast or perhaps as a bonus podcast. Perhaps to go with the income reports that I'm doing, or to replace those once we're out of the launch period. So I think it could be really interesting, and no one else that I know of is doing that, and it would be very helpful for the Patreon subscriber who's getting the individual feedback, but also to the community as a whole, because lots of these lessons will be things that could be applied more generally to book platforms and author careers as a whole. So that's what I'm thinking of. I've got to sit down and find a bit of time to start scoping that out a bit more, but that would be something that would be an exclusive benefit for Patreon subscribers, because they would be the ones who'd be eligible to put their platforms forward.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Like what we would call an MOT in the UK, and there must be annual vehicle inspection you get in the UK, just to make sure that everything under the bonnet is running in an optimal way.
Under the hood.
Under the hood, yes. The bonnet would be what the Amish wear when they go shopping. Do you want to put some criteria on that? Do you need at least 2 books out or 3 books out, or would it be, because once we draw somebody, it might be somebody who's just published their first book, but I suppose that would still be relevant.
Yeah, I think it's relevant for everybody, really. I don't think I'd put any criteria on it at the moment. As I say, I'm still kind of, it's back of the envelope stuff at the moment, but I think it would be, it's quite an interesting idea that might be fun.
Yeah, great. That sounds a really, really good plan. And again, before we get into the value of a reader, I want to quiz you on something that happened yesterday, which is, where's my phone? I usually turn it off for the podcast, which is the sensible thing to do, but popped up on my phone yesterday, and I don't know how easily I'll be able to show this, was an instant message. And of course, being a good person, in fact, what you can see, if you're watching on YouTube, you might just be able to see there is the Amazon page for the book that Mark launched yesterday. And the reason that's actually within Messenger, because I clicked on the link, being a good follower of Mark's, and there is the message that popped up from Mark. So you can't see it very well in this light, but it basically said, "Hello from Salisbury, I've got a brand new John Milton novella." And it was very easy to scroll down, very tempting to click on tell me more. It was a polite message that said I didn't have to if I didn't want to. And then the easiest thing in the world to then click on an Amazon link and at least go through and read the blurb on a new book. Now, I recognised whilst this popped up, and we think a lot about resistance points in sales funnels and so on, that this was one of the key ways of getting through to people. It seemed to work in a way that lots of other ways don't work. Email open rates are pretty low across the industry. So I wanted to quiz you a little bit about this before we get into other things. And I think probably there's a full podcast episode on this at some point, but just just tell me, I think this was the first time you used it fully for a launch?
Yeah, it was. So what it is it's Facebook Messenger is now there are various bits and pieces of software that would enable you to send messages at scale in the same way that you can with a mailing list. Anyone who's interacted with my author page becomes effectively a subscriber on Messenger. And I've been trying to build up that subscriber base by encouraging people in my mailing list to cross over and to interact with me on Facebook Messenger. And there's a few ways that I've done that. And also I've been running ads and Facebook ads encouraging people to interact with me on Messenger. And the fun thing is there's loads and loads of really cool stuff at the moment that you can do with that. So I've got a Facebook Messenger bot set up using a piece of software called ManyChat that, for example, if someone sends me a message saying with a trigger word, the bot will spot the trigger word and will then take them through a curated process whereby I'll recommend one of my books to them depending on what they're interested in reading. So it might be geographical, and then I'll send them to a particular Milton book depending on where they'd like it to be set, or tone, or reader reviews, or anything like that. But it seems like it's a curated experience, whereas in fact it's just something that's been set up in advance that takes them through that path and then deposits them at the end at the relevant Amazon page where they can then buy the book. And I found that has been quite a cheap way to generate interest and sales. But the other benefit to that is that as soon as anyone goes through that process, they become a subscriber. And then when I have a launch, as I did yesterday with a book called Scorpion, it enables me to send out messages through Messenger to them. And the massive benefit to that, as you've hinted at, is that the open rates and the click rates and the general interaction is stupendously high compared to any other means that I've used before. So on the mailing list side of things, obviously I sent out mailing list notifications as I normally would yesterday, and had, say, maybe open rates of 40% across all of the lists, which is fairly standard, and then a click rate of perhaps between 10 and 15%. Again, reasonably standard, and there's ways that I'll be able to increase that as I go through the next couple of weeks. But the open rates on the Messenger messages that went out was well over 90%, and the click rate was something like, I don't know, top of my head, about 30%. So way better than mailing lists in both senses, both open rate and actual interacting by way of going to the Amazon page. It's just really powerful. Now, not many people are doing that at the moment, so it doesn't have the same kind of clutter that you get with email. Some people are worried that it's intrusive, but it's all as you said, you got the email. The message was quite polite. It makes it very obvious that you don't have to do anything with it. It makes it very obvious that it's easy to unsubscribe if you don't want to get any more of those messages. And I think out of about 2,500 that went out yesterday, I had 50 unsubscribes, which is nothing really in the grand scheme of things. So we'll see. It's something I'm really interested in. Loads of potential here, and it actually is going to be one of the bonus courses we have for Ads for Authors. Will be something based on how to set up a messenger bot and how to do this kind of a broadcast to increase traffic when you've got something, maybe a promotion or a sale or something like that. So very encouraging right now how it's gone, and I think there's tons more that we can explore with this.
So it's a subscription service, is it? The bot organizer. Yeah,
ManyChat costs, depending on the amount of subscribers that you have, it's pretty cheap. I think I'm paying about $25 a month at the moment, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not significant really.
Yeah. Good. Well, it seems very effective. Do you think, off the top of your head, do you think this is because it's new and not many people are using it at the moment and it will lose its effectiveness over time? Or do you think this is always going to be quite a good way of getting in touch with people?
It's quite hard to say. I mean, I think there's a bit of that. But one of the things is we've all got our phones with us. And one of the things you can do with ManyChat when you're sending out these broadcasts is you can select how intrusive you want the message to be. That's not really the right word, but how easy it is to notice it. So I set it yesterday to make phones make a noise. So it would bing as the notification came in, and it's on the screen, so you can't avoid seeing it. It comes through provided you've got notifications switched on for Facebook. It comes on the screen. You can't avoid it. You will at least see it, and then you can obviously swipe through to ignore it or open it and read it. And those open rates, over 90%, I think over 95% actually, it just indicates that people will at least read the first message. It's very difficult to avoid seeing at least the notification that I've got a new book out.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Well, I wanted to quiz you about that, having had that popped up. Do I have to buy the book, by the way? I did notice you had 313 clicks. One of those was mine, so it's really had 312.
Oh, I see. Yes. No, that's more than that. Actually, that was when I sent that screen grab out.
That was early on, yeah.
Early, so it was way more than that by the end of the day. But it did very well. I mean, the book got into the top 100 in the UK, top 200 in the States. So a pretty decent launch, and it's the first one that I've done as a collaboration. So that's going to be really interesting. There's definitely a podcast episode there. It was with Steve Kavanagh, who we've had on the podcast before.
Yes.
And the next one is with Scott Mariani, who is again a Sunday Times best-selling author. So writing in my world, which is pretty fun.
And you had a mini thrill this morning when one of your friends sent you a photograph snapped on a train of a passenger reading one of your novels. Yeah,
that's never happened before. So I was at a festival last week with LJ Ross, who is a very prolific and big-selling indie cozy mystery writer over here. And she said the other day she saw someone on a train reading one of her books, and she asked whether the passenger enjoyed it, but she didn't say that she wrote it. Now, I would have been completely the opposite. I would have been like, I wrote that, and I always wanted that. It's never happened to me that I've seen someone reading one of my books before. And we were talking about this at the festival. It's, given that I've sold, well over 1 million copies, almost certainly someone would have been reading on their Kindle whilst I was around, but I wouldn't know that. One of the things about the Kindle is you can read, no one knows what you're reading, which is why Smut does so well on Kindle.
Erotica's done so well.
Exactly. But yeah, this was a Create Space book, and yeah, my friend was on the train this morning and he snapped a picture, and the book looked great, but then he kind of took the wind out of my sails a little bit, saying that the bloke who was reading it was actually asleep. So yeah. But still, no, that was it was a nice moment.
I wouldn't say that.
I would have woken him up.
Yeah, I think yes, exactly. I think every author would be thrilled with that. I saw a tweet from Judy Murray, Andy Murray's mother, the other day, snapping somebody on the tube reading her autobiography opposite her, and of course her sort of head was down here in the autobiography, and I think she just looked up and realised the author was sitting opposite her.
Yeah, she was.
And she said, "Do I say something?" Question mark.
Yes, you do. No, she was at the festival actually.
Oh, she was. Okay,
she was. Yeah, I had. It's quite weird. We'll perhaps talk about it another time. But I ended up. It was amazing at Althorpe House. So that's Earl Spencer, who is Princess Diana's brother, and a really amazing house. Plenty of interesting guests. I had lunch both days with Earl Spencer and his wife, and Pam Ayres, who'll be of no interest to anyone outside the UK.
Oh, we love Pam Ayres.
My mother loves
in the
Pam
UK.
Ayres. So that was and Boise from Only Fools and Horses, again of no interest to anybody outside the UK, but quite cool for those of us who grew up in the 80s. Like me.
Well, people old enough will remember Earl Spencer's eulogy at Diana's funeral as being a moment in history.
Yeah.
It's beautiful grounds. Obviously, as a BBC reporter on this patch, at that time I spent a lot of time at Althorpe. But Altrip, I think, is he wanted it to be pronounced for a while. I think he's given up on that now.
Right.
It's been the old-fashioned pronunciation. But and the way where they've buried Diana is very beautiful on the island, and it's very peaceful. So yes, and I know you struggled through all of that a bit. Worse for wear in terms of cold.
Yeah, I've had a stinking cold for a week, which meant, unfortunately, I had to leave on the Saturday, and so I was replaced by Mel Sherratt, who listens to the podcast. Hello, Mel. And I got an email the next day from Louise saying that they'd all been taken by surprise when the Earl invited the Amazon team and the authors to have dinner with him at the house, and then to stay overnight, which was very nice, given that the hotel that we were staying in was basically the Linton Travel Tavern from Alan Partridge.
Right.
So I definitely missed out on that.
Well, Mel had a great time, and she posted on that, and it looked absolutely amazing. We're delighted for her that she enjoyed it, even if it might have been
you might be delighted.
You would have enjoyed
I'm furious.
As well. Yeah. There you go. It's time to share the love. Good. Okay. Well, look, I wanted to talk to you about those couple of things, but the meat in this episode which we need to get onto, is this question about the value of a reader.
Of a sale.
And like the value of a sale, rather, yes. And like I said at the beginning, it's something that people often don't take into account, but they need to, don't they?
They do. So, and this is something that I didn't used to take into account either. So basically, this is what we're talking about here is read through. So when we sell a book, so say the first in the series, the kind of the conservative and the safe way of calculating what that's worth to us is to look at the sale of that one book, deduct the delivery charge, work out the royalty, and then take that royalty and use that in our calculations to work out what the return on investment was. And at least until about 6 months ago, that was what I did, because I'm quite cautious by nature, and when I'm assessing whether an ad is working or not, I like to remove speculation as far as I can. So I know that if I sell a $6.99 box set, I know that I'm going to get $4.80 back. Right? That is given unless the book is returned as a refund. I know that is what I'm banking. So provided that my cost of acquiring that sale is less than the amount that I know I'm going to receive, I know that ad has been successful. Now, the more I thought about that, and I've spoken to other authors as well. There's one, Michael Cooper, who's doing really well. He's got a good book on Facebook ads called Help My Facebook Ads Suck, which I recommend. And Michael's wife is in the SPF community, and I've spoken to Michael and to her for quite a bit. What authors like Michael have done, and Brian Meeks as well also does this, is to actually look at how readers actually behave once they've had the first book. So if you're buying a series, and this is quite easy to just extrapolate this from your own experience. So I'll ask you, James, you like Douglas Adams. So let's think the first Douglas Adams book that you bought back in 1953 would have been, whatever it was, but you wouldn't have been the last.
The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, yeah, so 1982.
Probably something around that time, but that wouldn't have been the last book you read. You would have gone on to read Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, probably. And all the other Hitchhiker's books. So maybe you've ended up reading 8 or 9 of his books. Fair?
I've read every one of his books.
Okay, so
including The Meaning of Life, co-authored with John Lloyd.
There you go. So if say this was, let's move this forward into the present day. So let's just say he was still around and he was using Facebook ads to sell Hitchhikers. He could have said, well, the only thing I'm going to take into account is £3 that I make from the sale of every copy of Hitchhikers. But that would be wrong, because for you, he didn't make £3 off you. Maybe he made £30 because you've gone through and bought everything else that he's written. So, 100% read through is unusual, but there's definitely an element that we can take into account when we're working out what the sale of one book is actually worth. So I started to look into this. Now, one of the benefits, this is certainly easier to do if you write in series, although it's not necessarily exclusive to series, because Douglas Adams didn't just write Hitchhiker's Guide. He wrote lots of other things, and you've gone through all of those. Ian Banks, for example, in his literary works, didn't just write, the Wasp Factory is not connected to the road, or the bridge, or whatever. There's lots of separate standalones. But as a fan of Ian Banks, I would have chewed through all of those books. So I started to look at that myself. Now I write in series, so and I'm typically either advertising a box set which has the first 3 novels in the Milton series, or at the moment I'm doing a lot of advertising on The Cleaner, which is the first book. And there are different ways to calculate read through. There's a mathematical way, so we can look at percentages as we progress through the series. So if we start with the first book in the series, and let's say we sell 100 copies of the first book and then 60 copies of the second book, read through from book 1 to book 2 is 60%. So 60 divided by 100, we know that it's 60%. And then let's say at the end of the series, so book 10, we sell 20 copies. So to work out what the read through from book 1 all the way down to that one is 20 divided by 100. And then when we've got those percentage terms, to calculate the actual value of each book in the series, we just take the royalty and multiply it by the percentage. And then at the end of the process, we come up with a cumulative figure, which is what the series as a whole is worth. So I've been doing quite a lot of calculations on this, and I've actually engaged statisticians to look at it for me to help me make sure that my maths.
I was going to say,
go on.
Just on that point, that's quite a complicated figure to come to. Whilst I think we all understand the 60%, 40%, 30%, coming up with one figure that represents that overall, how did you get to that?
You have to. I mean, it'd be much easier if I had a spreadsheet that I could show you how I've done this, and I think that would be part. We're going to do a bit of this in the course, and that would be something that we include. But you kind of work out on a book by book basis what the read through is from the first book in the series, and then to work out what the value is, you just apply that percentage book by book to each the value of each sale for each book, and then you come up with a cumulative figure at the bottom. So I've been running. There's other ways before I get onto the actual value. The other ways you can look at read through. I survey my readers quite a lot. So every year I'll run a survey, and one of the questions that I ask is, how many books do you typically have you bought in my series? And I know that my read through is quite high, and my readers tend to read more than just one. So I think the median for me was between 6 and 8 books. So I know that if you buy one, the odds are you're going to buy more than just that one. The other way, I mean, the kind of gold standard would be to ask Amazon to tell you how many books on average a person who buys the first book in the series goes on to buy. Now, Amazon can do that, and indeed I have asked them if they tell me that, and unfortunately they're not able to. And I think there's lots of different reasons why. I think they're not against the idea of helping authors in that way, but there are kind of company and possibly even legal reasons, data protection reasons, why they can't give you that data. But I asked Apple as well. Apple couldn't help me either. But then asked Kobo, and lovely Mark, who I know you probably sang some songs with Nink last week. He has provided me with some very useful data that's enabled me to at least back up my suppositions when it comes to how many books people read in my particular series. And I'm no different from most authors. So these kinds of learnings should be fairly standard across the board. But once we have all that data, then we need to work out the value. So again, by using that mathematical model that I mentioned earlier, I have a kind of an optimistic and a pessimistic read-through figure. And when I'm calculating, when I'm using those figures, I tend, because I'm fairly careful, I'll use the pessimistic figure. But kind of just back of the envelope stuff, the pessimistic figure for the sale of The Cleaner, so the first book in the series, that's actually worth about $8 to me. The optimistic one, which is probably actually more realistic, but I move away from it because it's less safe, is about $14. So when you know that, and I'm running campaigns with The Cleaner at 99 cents at the moment, it isn't a 35-cent royalty that I'm making every time I make that sale. It's probably between $8 and $14, and that means I can be much more aggressive with my campaigns and much less stringent in terms of conversion and all that kind of stuff. So, any questions while I have a quick drink? I'll tell you some. I did a lot of testing in August. We'll get onto it when I've wet my whistle.
So the bottom line here is when you're running a campaign and you're looking at your ROI on that specific campaign, you would at this point, and actually I've heard this week in a couple of the podcast interviews I've done for the Future Authors saying exactly this, that they will run campaigns at a negative, knowing this information. In fact, I have a feeling that Dave Gochran, who we interviewed last week, said exactly this, that he will run campaigns at a loss because he understands the holistic picture.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I've done. So in August, I started to test this a bit more extensively, and I dropped the price of The Cleaner to 99 cents because that's impulse. That's well within the realm of impulse purchase. And I started to send a lot of Facebook traffic to that book, and it was just in the UK, and I spent. And I know this is, although this is a UK campaign, most of my numbers are in dollars for lots of reasons I don't need to bore people with. But I spent $5,500 on Facebook ads in August sending traffic to that book. And the results were really, really pleasing and impressive. So I was monitoring it in lots and lots of different ways. But the kind of most obvious way was that ranks of all those books increased almost immediately. So The Cleaner went from something like 3,000 in the store to up to about 100. And that's slightly artificial because I'm sending tons and tons of traffic there, and so I'm generating immediate sales on that book. But what was more pleasing, because it demonstrated that the logic behind the campaign was sound, was that sales on books 2 to 5, which were the ones that I was covering, I was monitoring most carefully, all increased. So if you think about your dashboard in KDP, I know you don't have a dashboard yet, James, because you still haven't finished your book. But once you do have it, you'll be spending a lot of time looking at graphs and figures. But one of the things that you can see is it's a bar graph. So the sales of Saint Death, for example, for maybe a 90-day period or 6 months, you can see what it's like. So maybe I'm selling 10 a day of that book. As soon as read-through starts to trickle from book 1 into book 2, sales on that book were really obvious, and the bar graph leapt up. So Saint Death previously was selling 8 copies a day, which was making me £19.50 a day. Almost immediately, within 2 weeks of this campaign going live, it jumped up to 24 copies a day, which was worth £58 a day. So there's nothing else that can explain that. So there's that Sherlock Holmes quote that once you've eliminated everything else, whatever is left, no matter how improbable it is, must be the reason why something has happened. I've completely butchered that quote, but anyway,
it's also Occam's razor, by the way, which is it even predates Sherlock Holmes. Is the least unlikely answer is the correct answer.
Exactly. So there's no other reason for it. It has to be the advertising, and that was replicated across all of the books that I was tracking. So the 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I've started to see it as obviously people need time to read through those books. They're 100,000 word novels. It's going to take a month to read 4 of them, but I'm now starting to see it going to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and of course they will now be readers as I progress and release book 12, book 13, the one I released yesterday. They're going to be interested in that too. So I've seen a really marked increase, and then that's continued into September. So I saw what I was doing with those sales through June, July, August, and in September I'm attributing an extra $4,000 to that campaign, and nothing else could have explained why those books have suddenly started selling more significantly. So it just goes to show, I think caution when you're working out these kinds of things is a really sensible attribute to have, because you want to make sure that you're covering your expenses. Otherwise, it'd be very easy to lose your shirt. But read-through is a thing. Common sense says that it is, and data now. I've tested this extensively. It's really clear to me that this does happen. It's something that we can safely incorporate into our calculations when we're running ads, and that, to be honest, it completely revolutionizes advertising for me. Anyway, I don't need to be ROI positive immediately on what I'm selling. I can take a slightly more speculative view, and it's not very speculative because, as for the reasons I've just given, I can take a slightly longer view because there are more books that these readers that I'm finding through ads will read, and that means that I'm going to be making more money, perhaps over a slightly longer period. But it's been a big kind of sea change for how I view things when it comes to advertising.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions on that. So obviously, as you rudely pointed out, I'm not familiar with the dashboard on KDP, but monitoring that sort of movement of your books in charts, which is a key indicator for you that there's read-through going on, is that something you have to do contemporaneously, i.e. at the time, week to week, or can you sit down once every 3 months and then look back and trot and then sort of work this out?
Either way, with read-through, typically if you buy a book today, I'm not going to see read-through on book 3 until you've read books 1 and 2 and gone into book 3. So as I say, the kind of lag from book 1 to book 2 seemed to be about between 10 and 14 days, which seems about right to me. So people would buy book 1, and then 10 days later they'll have finished book 1 and they'll move on to book 2, and you can see that really clearly in the graph. Patterns are always easier to detect when you've got more data to look at. So I think that the patterns will be more obvious over longer periods of time, certainly easier to pinpoint where if things start to happen. But yeah, you'll probably notice effects reasonably quickly, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. And the other question that sort of occurs to me is how you promote and encourage read-through. And I guess this comes down to back matter and the way that you format the books. That's
a very good point. So before I started doing this campaign, I looked at the cleaner and I optimized it as much as I could to make it very, very easy for people to see that there was another book that they could read. So the first thing that they would see wouldn't be a call for reviews. I don't need to do that. I've got 1,000 reviews on the cleaner side. That doesn't make much difference to me. But I want them to know that they can go on to buy Saint Death, which is the second one, or indeed the next, or the Driver. Or if they want to, I'm happy for them to buy the box set. So they have the next 2, 3, and 4, and a bonus novella in that box set. So yeah, make that really, really clear. The links go straight to Amazon, or straight to Apple if I'm running this on a different store. You just really make it obvious that there's because at that point, if they've got to the end, they enjoyed the book, they finished the book, they are ready and they're primed to think, what am I going to read next? Am I going to read the new James Patterson, or did I like this enough to read the next Mark Dawson? You want to make it very easy for them to go, I'll read James Patterson later, I really want to know what happens to Milton next. So you just got to think about that and try and encourage the behavior that you want them to take. So yeah, that seems to have worked too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, a lot of this is advertising law, LORE law, and if you work in advertising, which is a science in its own right, you start to understand that it's not about the immediate person who walks past the billboard or whatever. They look at trends and bigger pictures, and it's taking some of that science, which is unique to that industry, and just applying it to your little world that you're running as an indie publisher here, which is what you're teaching really is all about, Mark. And I know you love this stuff, but it's so important. It's so important to understand that this is not simply, don't get frustrated at one advert not working. Always look at what it's doing to you in the long term and why that advert is important to you beyond that one campaign. Yeah,
as I say, it changes everything. So previously people would say to me, like, I'm advertising book one and I'm not making a positive return on book one. And my view would have been to say, well, work on the ad, because you need to get that ad to convert better. That was probably too pessimistic, because if they had a series and they had multiple books, not necessarily a series, but they had other books for readers to buy if they enjoyed the first one, then the numbers were wrong. I wasn't looking at everything in the way that I should have done. And switching the ad off may well have been bad advice, because they may have been making what would have looked like a loss on the ad. But if you then incorporate the benefits of getting people introduced to the first book and then seeing them go into the series or into the other books, actually that ad may have been really, really valuable. So it's a funny one. And one of the things I'm going to be doing on the course is that I'll be looking at this in more detail, and we'll be presenting different ways to work out the effectiveness of ads. On the one hand, from the immediate, am I making an immediate profit on this ad, which is still possible. I do that on the ads that I'm running quite a lot of the time. Or am I making a long-term benefit by sending people, introducing them into my books and then sending them through the rest of the books? So we'll look at both of those in much more detail.
So the bottom line is that people could be switching off ads that are doing well for their careers.
Yep, absolutely, and I'm sure I would have done that before. And I'm ramping up ad spend, as I've been noting in the income reports, the last couple of income reports. I'm now spending quite a bit on these 99-cent books in the US and the UK. And if I was just looking at what I'm spending and what I'm making, I would be making 80% loss probably. But I know that's not the case. I think I'm actually probably making 150, 200% profit. So it really changes things around drastically.
Yeah, I guess it's an extension of the perma-free, the loss leader, as they call it in supermarkets. You price your bread and beans and the very common items that people use as a benchmark. You price them and you make a loss on them, knowing that the rest of the shop is going to make you the profit.
Yeah, exactly that. And this isn't kind of new advertising theory. People have been doing this for 50 years. So, it's bringing it into the 21st century, applying modern advertising principles to something that has been around for quite a long time.
Good. Excellent. Well, that was a really good chat. You've mentioned the course a couple of times. What we are adding this time around, and I'm in the midst of editing at the moment, is a very, very good module on the BookBub ads platform, which has been authored for us by Adam Croft, who's really cracked it. And again, there's some really counterintuitive things in there that are not immediately obvious to you. And I know I've seen a few people saying BookBub ads don't work for me. And I've seen straight away that they haven't understood some of the things that Adam's been through. He spent a lot of money getting to the point where he is now. That's a very good module, and that's going to be added this time around. And at some point, we'd like both YouTube, AdWords, and Facebook to settle down their platforms so that we can get on with updating that. I can't believe the AdWords platform, I've been talking about updating that for 7 months. I'm still on the old platform, apart from when I logged in America and I got the brand new AdWords platform. And occasionally you're offered an opportunity to switch between them. And I don't really understand AdWords, why you haven't made this positive move to switch across to it. And I know some people have said that they have gone back and they can't get forward again. And I know Facebook are rolling out rather slowly for them, I think, this switch between Power Editor and Ads Manager. But we would like that to settle down a bit so we can, from where we are now, crack on with the revising. But people know if they get a course off SPF, it's updated and brought into relevancy as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, yeah. So as we sit here recording this in a bit in advance, I still don't have the interface that I need to revisit the stuff. So it just means that at some point in October, I am going to be, that's all I'm going to be doing for a week, is recording, updating the screenflows. So yeah, just wait for it to happen. That's, come on. If anyone knows Mark Zuckerberg, then give him a kick.
He's on Facebook. You could probably message him.
Good idea, yeah. I'll try that.
Yeah, great. Okay, look, Mark, we've been chatting for over 40 minutes. This has been brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. And you sounded at one point, I know you've recorded your voice locally, so when people hear this, they're going to hear this normally. I turn my phone off. I know it's my wife who's trying to leave the house. We've got puppy issues as well going on in there. But it stripped all the low frequencies out of your voice, so you sounded like a Dalek. And then it stripped all the high frequencies out, and you sounded quite camp. But, oh my goodness, everything's happening here. We're going to have to call this quits. Thank you very much indeed, Mark. We'll speak to you next week. Have a great week writing and a great week selling.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingformula.com for more information, show notes, and links on today's topics. You can also sign up for our free video series on using Facebook ads to grow your mailing list. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.